Hi folks, welcome to this week's episode of the Ask the Arb podcast, where we've got a real treat for you. In this week, we're going to be deep diving into listeners' questions. These questions have come flooding into me from all over our social media channels. So sit tight, let's dive in, let's see if we can solve some problems for people. Hi folks, welcome back to the Ask the Arb podcast, where this week we're going to be deep diving into some more listeners' questions, because as we know, the planning system in the UK is kind of messed up and devilishly difficult. And in my first of our two wonderful features that we do every week, if you're a new listener, you're in for a treat. The first one is called You Couldn't Plan It. So I'm going to play my wonderful jingle, and then we'll have a look at some wild and wacky news stories in relation to planning.
It's time for You Couldn't Plan It, the feature where me and my team have scoured the internet for stupid, silly and downright infuriating planning-related facts. Let's go.
I really must sort out my intonation. Intonation, is that the right way of... I don't know. I really must sort it out because it frustrates me on that. And now I've mentioned it, you're all going to hear it. So what I've got here is a news article from the website thisismoney.co.uk, which is all about homes and all of that kind of good stuff. And the headline of this article basically says 7 bizarre property laws you might have broken without realising. Now, disclaimer... some of these are going to be a bit triggering for people, but there we go. So here we go. Let's scroll down. Let's have a look at that. So the top one, it doesn't get any worse than this, by the way. Can you legally pee in your own garden? Anybody that's got children under the age of 10, I'm sure this is a constant challenge. I quite often used to look out of my window and see my 4-year-old son having a pee in the middle of the lawn. But there we go. Apparently, technically, yes, you can, but only if it's private and not visible to others. They don't say what's visible to others, but there we go. It's not in itself illegal, apparently, but you do run the risk of indecent exposure. So there we go. And also, bizarrely, if urine finds its way onto neighbouring properties causing damage, you risk your neighbour claiming damages for nuisance. So there we go. Bit of a weird one. You must offer cut tree branches back to a neighbour. Well, I started my career as a tree surgeon many decades ago. In fact, I found a 17-year-old video of me swinging around up a tree, which I must send to you because you're going to find that hilarious. I'm pointing at Kian. So this is something that we used to hear about all the time, and it's to do with common law, I believe. So let's have a look. If a neighbour's tree hangs over your garden, you have the right to cut branches back to your boundary, and that includes roots as well, by the way, but you are legally obliged to offer the cuttings back to the tree's owner. Throwing them back without consent or disposing of them could technically lead to a civil dispute. We've heard about this a lot. I always used to caution people and say, if the tree is protected by a tree preservation order and you get it sort of trimmed back to the boundary and one-sided it, and we covered it many episodes ago of a tree that was literally trimmed right to the boundary, you're going to be in all sorts of trouble with that as well. So it's good to talk, I think. Apparently, looking into a neighbour's window can be harassment. If your behaviour causes distress, it can be classed as harassment, even if you do it from within your own home. So there we go. This is an interesting one because I've done this. Mowing a verge outside your home could be illegal. Many homeowners take pride in tidying the area at the front of their home, but if it's a grass verge, it may belong to the local authority. In this case, cutting, planting or altering it without permission may be considered lawful interference. Given that the local authorities don't have the money to cut the verges themselves, I'd be amazed if anything happens there. But interestingly, it could also be a criminal offence if your activity obstructs the highway. I have seen people going up and down verges on ride-on mowers and things, and you think you are asking to get hit by a lorry or something. So there we go. Apparently, hanging washing in your front garden can be banned. it's all to do with aesthetic controls. I'm not going to dive into that. Your neighbour may have a legal right to light. I think everyone knows about this. If a window has received uninterrupted natural light for over 20 years, the property owner may have acquired a legal right to that light. Any new structure that blocks the light could be challenged in court. And finally, you may need planning permission for a driveway. If you lay impermeable paving over more than 5 square metres of front garden without proper drainage, planning permission is often required, and local authorities quite often will issue enforcement notices. Interestingly, one that comes up in our consultancy all the time is, what do they call them? Crossovers. So getting your vehicle, you may well put a driveway in, or your house may have been built with a driveway, but you don't have a legal right to drive your car across the pavement. So if you haven't got a drop curb and you want to put a crossover in, it can be devilishly difficult to get the local authority to sign off on that, particularly when there's trees nearby. And a lot of the London boroughs now, it's an automatic no. So have a think about that one. So there we go. Right, back to the pod. Let me find my questions. Where are we? Helen doesn't say where she's from, says, how do I know what level of ecological survey I need? You just need sound advice, really, Helen. Reach out to several ecological practices. They should all give you advice free of charge. I know we do. Essentially what would happen in that scenario is we would do like a very high level desktop study of where your property is based and the local area around that. We would then look at some publicly available resources to see what, if any, ecological constraints there are there. We might spend time looking at other planning applications that have gone in the local area. But I mean, ultimately, it all starts with a PEA, or what's known as a preliminary ecological assessment. If off the back of that there is potential for protected species or habitats, then quite often further surveys are required, and they are seasonal. So timing is key. Like most of these things, I highly recommend that you get good advice early on in the process. Abdul in Nottingham says, what are the common pitfalls that delay planning with tree and ecology surveys? Kind of tied to Helen, really, Abdul. The main one is late surveys and poor timing. So what a lot of people will do, often on the advice of their architects, is they will submit their planning application and see what happens and see what comes back. The problem is the planning system is grinding, it's underfunded, it's grinding, and if you do that, if you don't front load it, yes, it might save you some money short term, but long term it could cause you all sorts of problems. So get good advice early on. You don't want to be in a situation where you submit your application, it's validated, it gets a bit further down the process, and then they say, look, because you're doing alterations to your roof or whatever, you need a bat survey. Because you're putting in camping pods in a field, you need an ecological survey and a tree survey, etc. So the most common pitfall is late surveys, poor timing as well. That is becoming more and more a thing with biodiversity net gain. So with biodiversity net gain assessments, you have to condition score certain different habitats, and a grassland, for instance, could be condition scored in the winter, but if there's snow on the ground or something like that, it becomes very, very difficult. We have tried it before with very, very simplistic sites, but you do get pushback from the local authorities. So timing is everything. Missing constraints as well. Incomplete documentation. So if you're sending in an ecology survey, you need to make sure it's got the right plans. If you're sending in a tree survey, it needs to have the right plans to support that. So essentially you need to engage early and you need to plan well. I've got two more, one from Nazim and one from Sarah, but for that, this.
It's time for tremendous facts. Oh yeah. Get ready to learn, and that's a fact. Tremendous tremendous
I can
facts.
almost hear people skipping forwards 10 seconds in their car when that jingle comes on, because I know I would. But that's not the point. We love a bit of cheese here at Rover. I just love cheese, full stop, to be honest. So here we go. Here's I'll give you 4 or 5 quick fire facts here. So the Tula tree in Mexico has the thickest trunk of any tree, over 36 feet wide. That's quite something. Some trees can remember droughts and adjust their growth accordingly in future dry periods. And nature is clever, isn't it? Tree rings can record volcanic eruptions, droughts, and climate shifts over thousands of years. 2 more. In tropical rainforests, 75% of nutrients are stored in the trees and plants, not in the soil, which is kind of cool. And finally, trees produce stress chemicals when they are under attack, attracting predators of the insects eating them, which is kind of cool.
It's time for dream.
I'm not gonna play that, or shall I? Shall I play it again?
Get
No, I
ready.
won't play it again. Right, so what have we got? I can't turn it off. Stop. Right, back to the question. So we've got one here from Nazim. And we've got one from Sarah. So let's have a look at this. Nazim says, let me just bring that over. Nazim says, how much does a tree survey cost and what affects the price? Well, unlike a lot of consultancies, we here at Rover, and I try not to sell my own services, but sometimes it's relevant, we don't compete on price. And a lot of the good guys don't compete on price. They compete on value. What does that consultant bring to the table, and is it likely to move you forwards and give you what you need? What makes the cost vary though? Because there is a wide range. I would suggest most tree surveys are going to start around 450, 500 quid. If it's much less than that, I would be questioning the quality. I would check their reviews online. I would ask to see some of their reports, or a link to the planning portal where you can see a positive result. But ultimately, Nazim, costs vary by the size of the site. So one of the biggest variables with tree surveys is the amount of time that the consultant is going to spend on site collecting the data, and then also interpreting the data when they are back at the office. What also feeds into that as well is urgency. If you were to phone my team downstairs and say, I'm absolutely up against it, I need a tree survey carried out tomorrow, what can you do? We can help you with that using something called our accelerated survey, but you're going to pay more for it because people have got to work into the night to get it done for you and all that kind of good stuff. So size of the site, urgency affects it as well. Basic surveys, you might just get there are a lot of people out there that advertise tree surveys from 250 quid, 350 quid. That is quite often just the bit on site collecting the data. That's not good enough to support a planning application. You need at least an arboricultural impact assessment. And just factor in, more complex sites cost more. If you are building very, very close to trees, then that's going to make things a little bit more complicated as well. But it's a good question, Nazim, and obviously cost comes up a lot. Sarah from Stoke says, what info should my report include to satisfy the local authorities? I'm assuming that we're talking trees here, but it might not. I'm going to assume it's trees, Sarah. There's a video that I did on arboricultural data tables, which is the most dry 15-minute video you're ever going to watch in your life. It's even worse than this. However, this is a niche area and it will give you specific information. But ultimately, the site survey bit of it, we have to collect data to the British standard BS 5837 2012. And that includes things like tree species, tree size, tree condition, the categorization of the trees as well, whether they're A-class trees or U-class trees. It picks up enough information to calculate what's known as the RPA, which is like a root protection area, the rooting zone. And once you've got that arboricultural data table, from that data will be applied to the drawing, which is called the tree constraints plan. And on that tree constraints plan, it will link to the arboricultural data tables. And that means that when the arboricultural consultant or the tree officer at the local authority looks at it, when they look at that plan, they'll be able to instantly see what the tree impacts are at that site. Some consultancies do plan-based assessments. You might only get a single side of A4 with all the information on that. Others, like us, it's a combination of the two. But yeah, you need to make sure all of that is on there. In terms of ecological reports, there are a couple of elements to it, and it's a huge subject, so I'll just touch on it lightly. But the first part of any ecology report is the preliminary ecological assessment, unless you've been asked for something specialist, but a preliminary ecological assessment. The first part of that is the desktop study, where the ecologist, before they come to site, will do a desktop study of available resources, both public and something from what's known as LERC data, or a local ecological record centre. So you'll get charged a fee that goes direct to them. These local ecological record centres hold information from ecological consultancies, volunteer groups, conservation bodies, all that sort of stuff. And the records are quite often confidential because they're talking about protected species. So the ecologist will do a desktop study of all of that information before they go to site. They'll then collect lots of information on site. That's the on-site element. And then there'll be conclusions and what the next actions are. The Industry Trade Association for Ecology, SIEM, publishes guidelines on what those reports should look like and the structure that they should follow. And there are geographical differences between Scotland, England and Wales. There's different statutory bodies, etc., etc., etc. So ecology tends to be much more complicated than arboriculture. So I think that is all the questions we have got time for today. So I'd just like to wrap up by saying, if you're listening to this, if you're an architect, a planning consultant, landscape architect, maybe even a homeowner, and you're a little bit confused by all of this, reach out to us, get in contact, send us in your questions. We've got some free resources on our main Rover Group website. You can go on there and you can download copies of my books that you can see in the background if you're watching on YouTube, and they're going to help you get your planning back on track. Catch you in the next one.